I'm gonna assume, it's a little past time, so hopefully everyone's had a chance
So we'll start. So
to schmooze properly. We're gonna get started. I'm gonna, in case you don't know the words, I'm gonna put this up on the screen so you all can sing along with me. Halachma Anya, which is, the words are directly from the Haggadah, so it's a good start for us to get into some Passover music. Halachma, halachma anya di achalu ahatana be'ara adi Mitzrayim be'ara adi Mitzrayim kol ichvin yete ve'yechu kol itrich yete ve'yivsach Hashata hacha leshana haba be'arade Yisrael Hashata av leshana haba b'nei chorim. And that song translates to, "This is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come and celebrate Passover. Now we are here. Next year may we be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year may we be free." And I think it's beautiful that we always, have this as one of the beginning songs at our Seder, right? Not just to celebrate the bread of affliction, right? But let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come and celebrate. So, beautiful sentiment. We have Seders, and this year still being under quarantine, things are still a little bit different. But we look forward to Passover as a time when we get to share foods and stories with our families, with our loved ones, and I think we can still say that that's something we're doing for Passover. Does anybody want to say anything before we get started in the program?
We usually sing Avadim Hayinu as opposed to the way you
I've got Avadim Hayinu.
I love that. It's such a spirit raiser.
Sure, let's do it. Avadim Hayinu. I got it right here. Avadim Hayinu, Hayinu. Lefara b'Mitzrayim, b'Mitzrayim. Avadim Hayinu. Ata b'nei chorim. Avadim Hayinu. Ata b'nei chorim, b'nei chorim.
Told you, spirit raiser.
I came prepared. I thought, well, what if someone requests? I thought, well, I might as well keep the music next to me just in case. Well, welcome everybody. So when I was first asked about the possibility of having a sisterhood pre-Passover, a Seder type of program like a Nosh and Learn, I was so excited to be able to share something from some of my previous learnings and experiences with you all, and we ended up settling, as many of you know, on the some of the foods and some of the customs surrounding what we eat during Passover time. So with that, I'm gonna get started. I'm gonna share the screen so you all can see. I have a PowerPoint just so we have a little bit of a visual aid as we kind of go through these steps, and then we'll have breaks for questions in between some of these topics. Okay, so the first question, what don't Jews eat on Passover? But before I even get to that, I want to actually open it up. If you all feel like unmuting, I want to ask you, what is a must for Passover food for you? So I'll give you a second if you want to unmute and just share, like, what's a meal, what's a must in terms of foods for Passover. Susan?
Matzah brai.
Matzah brai. All right. Anybody else?
Ditto.
Unmute.
Matzo ball soup.
Matzo ball soup. Okay.
Matzah meal latkes.
All right. Latkes.
Yum.
Simmus.
What was it?
Simmus.
Simmus. Yes. Very popular.
I make a popover, and I don't know why I don't make it other times of the year because my family loves them. But that's
Yes,
like my favorite.
I've heard of
breakfast.
Passover popovers before. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When we're all craving bread and get something
Similar to Passover rolls.
Passover rolls. Okay.
Yes. Mock oatmeal cookies made with matzah farfel.
Matzah farfel. Okay.
And a matzah yeah.
And Pesach mandelbrot.
Mandel bread, right?
Growing up, my grandparents made killer sponge cakes.
Sponge cakes, yes, yes. I mean, I would have to say that my food of choice would definitely be flourless chocolate cake because number one, because I'm a chocoholic, but number two, because about half the time my birthday falls during Passover. It's not this year, but and that was one of the only cakes that I could have for Passover that I would enjoy. So
my parents were married third night of Passover. It was wartime. It was 1944. And so they ended up with a sponge cake wedding cake.
Wow.
That's neat.
That's impressive.
Uh-huh.
All right. So, and if anybody else feels like putting in the chat, maybe, like what are some of the musts in terms of foods for Passover? I mean, obviously the stuff that goes in the Seder plate, but, I mean, I'm sure gefilte fish is also a popular choice during Passover. Just in terms of the time of year, people often will eat that during Passover.
In my family, we, I guess it's, your typical Ashkenazi, foods, brisket, and then we would have the egg noodles, lokshen,
Yep.
with the matzah balls. But since I'm not known for my culinary talents, I'm not married to someone like Philip Hain, Susan Sutton, who does a lot of, ambitious cooking. And with the pandemic, with our extended family not being able to, have a Seder in person, we have learned to be a little flexible, and we've created new traditions, I guess. Well, starting last year, some new things, because I don't know how to make brisket and I don't know how to make all these other things. So, so we actually, we made, I guess, there used to be something, the Streitz shake and bake. I remember my mother, it was something really easy for the non-Seder nights, that was quick, and, kids like shake and bake. So what we did last year, my husband and I, because we couldn't find shake and bake, at least in this neck of the woods, this part of LA, we used matzah meal and different spices and made our own shake and bake. And that was our meat dish for our Seder. So that was, I guess, a new tradition in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's what we're planning on doing this Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting how many of us are coming up with new traditions, especially, this is now our second Passover during quarantine. Yeah. Goodness. All right. Well, feel free to continue putting in the chat if there are some foods that you come up with that you think are just special for Passover that, wouldn't feel the same without it. All right. So you guys can all see the screen, yes? Mm-hmm. All right. The question is, what don't Jews eat on Passover? We know lots of the foods that we do eat on Passover, but what don't Jews eat on Passover? And the answer is chametz, right? We don't eat chametz on Passover. So what is chametz? I came up with a bit of an acronym, right? I spell it out BROWS, right? Browse. Barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt when they're leavened. Because keep in mind, those are the ingredients that are in the matzah that we eat, right? Okay. So that's what Jews don't eat on Passover. And then we come to kitniot, right? I'm sure, if you heard of kitniot before, yes, if you want to raise your hand. We've heard of kitniot. I'm seeing some hands. Okay. But then if you ask what kitniot is, it's kind of difficult to define. So I wanted to really delve into this topic because it can be very confusing. So what are kitniot? So there's a custom concerning avoiding kitniot that originates in early medieval France, which spread to high medieval Ashkenaz. So this was a very long time ago, if you keep in mind, like the 12th and 13th centuries, just about. So it's not quite 1,000 years ago, but close, pretty long time ago. So what are the possible reasons? So one reason given for that is that these food items were commonly stored with any of the 5 grains that constitute chametz, right? So either in the home or perhaps in the marketplaces. So that was one of the reasons given why, perhaps they, the Jews of those times decided to avoid a certain type of food besides just chametz, right? Maybe they were mixed in with each other that way. Or there's a possibility that due to crop rotations, chametz could be mixed in with them from growing together. If there were little pieces left over in the fields and then they could have gotten mixed in a harvesting process, you never know. So those are the origins of this custom. And what are kitniot? So broadly defined, kitniot are legumes, but not all legumes. If you look at a list of legumes, you'll see there are a few on there that maybe aren't on typical kitniot lists. Some of them are like one example is rooibos, like tea leaves. There's some certain ones that that we do consume that are not on a typical kitniot list. And it's not just legumes. Sometimes it's also seeds, grains, and certain spices. So I'm going to show you all a list, and I want you to pay attention. See if how many of these you recognize that you knew are kitniot, and how many of them maybe were you not aware of as being kitniot before. So this is the Orthodox Union's current list of kitniot: beans, buckwheat, caraway, cardamom; corn, fennel seeds, fenugreek, flaxseed; green beans, hemp seeds, lentils, millet; mustard, peas, poppy seeds, rapeseed; rice, sesame seeds, soybeans; and teff; and then maybe amaranth and peanuts. I say maybe because some communities include that in their list of kitniot and some do not. So that's a whole list. That's a whole list of kitniot. And sometimes people also include anise and licorice as also being kitniot, but it wasn't on the OU's official list. And they also had a whole list of items that may not be kitniot, but that you have to check special, maybe for fear of it mixing in. So I want to just take a quick moment. If anyone wants to unmute and just say, are there any items on this list that are surprising to you that maybe you weren't aware that people avoid during Passover? Feel free to shout it out or put it in the chat if there's any surprising items on there.
Mustard.
Yeah, mustard. That's the one that I was surprised by. I did not know that mustard was considered kitniot.
Well, the seeds.
Yeah, the seeds, exactly. Seeds are not legumes. Why are they on there? That's a good point.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Peas, well, I was thinking peas because peas from a pod
right.
are a vegetable.
But legumes are a type of vegetable. It's a classification of vegetable.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can make pea flour these days, so maybe that's the reason.
Yeah, so some people do point out that one of the reasonings, which I didn't mention before, but it's not as stark of a reason because because it's not. We know that it's not chametz. It's not one of the 5. Because if you look at the Torah, there are 5 grains that are specifically mentioned as being chametz to be avoided during Passover, and it was those 5 that I mentioned, right? Barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt. So if it's not one of those 5, you should be fine, right? In theory. But this custom came about a pretty long time ago, and some people did speculate that it could have been related to the fact that that people could, conceivably make flours out of this, could use it in a similar way to these types of grains, right? Now, some of these things that are on here, by the way, it's a bit surprising because, well, I'll mention, if anyone know, does anyone know what teff is? Is anyone familiar with teff? So, so
I'm not
teff
familiar.
is actually extremely similar to quinoa. And we all know that quinoa is fine for Passover, right? It's a seed that sprouts. Teff is like a very, it's like a cousin of quinoa, and it's like a smaller, slightly smaller seed that sprouts, but it's very similar in a lot of ways. So why would it be on there and quinoa's not? You know, and some of the things that are on here also, corn is not native to the lands that this, you know, to Ashkenaz, where this custom originates, and it's not native to Israel either. So why would corn be on this list, right? It's not any of those. So there have sometimes been the custom of only including things in kitniot that would have been native during, you know, during those time periods, and yet some of these things have kind of snuck into the list, like peanuts and corn. So yeah, it's a little. It seems like it's maybe a little bit arbitrary at times, and it can be hard to keep track of. And the fact is, the Orthodox Union made this list for this year's Passover. So who knows? Maybe next year's list might include more things or less. I mean, who knows what they're going to come up with for the next time. So who observes this custom? I'm sure many of you are aware. Ashkenazim, right? Most Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews have not observed this custom in the hundreds of years it's been around. So I want to mention the 2015 ruling. Is anybody familiar with this ruling?
Yes.
Yeah, I see a couple
Right.
hands maybe.
Some stuff.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there was and because this made a big splash. This was a big deal back when it happened. So the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which is a conservative Jewish authority, issued responsive rulings permitting Jews to eat kitniot. And I will mention there was a similar ruling in Israel back in 1989. It may have been a little bit more pressing in Eretz Israel back, you know, during those times, because they would have had maybe a larger population of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and maybe it would have been hard to kind of keep everybody under the same umbrella at the same time for Passover. But it's worth mentioning the Orthodox Union still maintains the rule of for Ashkenazic Jews, right? So we have these two poles, these two opposite poles that maybe we're feeling, okay, where am I going to land between these two? Like, what am I going to do? I will open up to questions in a little bit, Renee. So hold on. Okay. So what should I do regarding kitniot? I want to mention a really interesting article that I've read. It's dated April 17th, 2019. It's an article on reformjudaism.org, and it's called "Let My Popcorn Go," which is a very catchy title, very easy to remember. It pointed out these 5 concerns that were brought up by this person's rabbi in terms of reasons why to do away with kitniot. So reason number 1, avoiding kitniot is a custom, not a law. Halacha only requires us to avoid chametz. And it also points out in the article that Rabbi Samuel of Falaise in the 13th century referred to it as a minhag mahmud ta'ut, a mistaken custom. And in the 14th century, Rabbi Yeruham of Provence called it a minhag shtut, a foolish custom. Right? So even during its own times, people were confused about why are we doing this, right? So, the custom of grouping chametz and kitniot together in our practices can make it more difficult to remember which 5 foods the Torah actually prohibits, right? So if we have all these other things to keep track of in terms of foods to avoid during Passover, we might actually forget the 5 critical important ones, right? Because that's what's chametz, that's what's actually prohibited. It detracts from the joy of the holiday by limiting the number of permitted foods. Definitely a point worth mentioning, because I'm sure many of us do struggle with coming up with foods when there's such a broad category of foods to omit. It causes, and this is a big one for me, it causes unnecessary divisions between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, right? I think that's a very big point, especially because, look at Los Angeles. We have a very large population of Sephardic Jews, and so these communities coming together and being able to share a Passover meal together. And if some people are saying, well, you don't keep kosher enough for Passover for my standards, then that can be something that's off-putting, that kind of separates people from each other, and we don't need more reasons to do that in the Jewish community. And arguably, kitniyot falls into the category of mistaken or foolish customs subject to reform, according to halakha, like mentioned a little bit in number 1, right? So those are some of the reasons not to possibly not keep the custom of kitniyot. I want to bring up a couple of, because I got to play both sides of the issue. What are some reasons to keep avoiding kitniyot during Passover? And these are just the ones I came up with, but if you come up with more, feel free to mention them later or put them in the chat. Kosher for Passover labeling, right? Because the OU continues to maintain this kitniyot tradition, it is impossible to have a standard for kosher for Passover labeling on your food, right? You have to read for this, you have to avoid this, that. It's so many things to keep straight, and it gets your head spinning. So maybe it's just easier if I'm being careful on Passover and keeping kashrut and keeping kosher for Passover, then I'm just going to go with the labels, and I'm going to go with with what the Orthodox Union says, because they're in charge of a good portion of those labels for Passover, right? So I'm going to stick with that, and that's what I'm going to do for Passover. So it's definitely a good reason. Tradition, right? We can't discount the notion. I mean, tradition is a very important thing. Tradition is, what keeps us going throughout the years. And sometimes we come up with new traditions, right? But doing away with an old tradition that's been around for this long isn't an easy thing to do. So I definitely get the notion of, keeping with this tradition, even though you technically can. And this is a question that I'm kind of posing. Does eating kitniyot during Passover make things too easy that one might forget they are observing Passover in the first place? I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I don't eat a whole lot of bread on my day-to-day per se. But I do eat a lot of kitniyot. I eat beans and lentils, and I mean there's just so many things on that list. Corn, things that are prevalent throughout our diets. And maybe even more so, I would argue, than some of the chametz that we avoid during Passover. So, if you're saying, okay, I can eat kitniyot during Passover, might you forget that it's Passover in the first place? If you're not trying that hard anymore, maybe. I mean, that's just something to keep in mind. Something that I was considering. All right, so now I'll take some questions. I saw Renee had a hand raised. You want to ask a question about kitniyot?
Sure. So I saw that this kitniyot that applies to only Ashkenazim. So what if somebody is half Ashkenazi and half Sephardic or Mizrahi? Does the Orthodox Union say that they must follow kitniyot, even though their Sephardic or Mizrahi side would allow that?
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question. So we know that there are people who have both Ashkenazic and Sephardic roots, and of course that does cause quite the conundrum of what custom to keep during Passover. And it's not even just a child who has roots on both sides, but even the parents. They're sharing a household. What are they going to do for Passover, right? So in the discussions that I've come across, and in the articles I've read, and just people expressing these different things, and people I've known who have roots in both sides, it is typical for them to. I mean, they'll just go with whatever they decide feels the most right. But I feel like a lot of them do side with the Sephardic custom of I can eat kitniyot during Passover because this is something that's in my roots. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, even though the 2015 ruling did open it up to everybody, certainly people who have Sephardic roots and ancestry might feel a little bit more at ease with adopting that custom if they know that they have that ancestry, because they it's part of their culture, and it might be a little bit more readily acceptable. I think. In terms of what a rabbi in the OU would say, to someone who comes from that, I think it's just going to depend on the rabbi you talk to. They say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. I think you'll find that there's a lot of opinions out there about which path to take for that, and it's just kind of ultimately going to come down to which rabbi you ask, or just what feels right for your own sake of keeping the customs and traditions? It's a great question. Does anybody else have any questions about kitniyot? Yeah, Jan. You got to unmute.
Okay.
There you
Okay.
go.
Hello. Hi. Do the rabbis explain the connection between the various foods like fenugreek or sunflower seeds and the meaning of Passover? Otherwise, it kind of leads you away from the thinking about Passover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like I said, this custom is, in a way, it remains a little bit mysterious. We don't know the exact reason why it came about, but like I said, we do know that even people during those times said it's a mistaken custom. But sometimes mistakes, still get integrated into our traditions, right? We say that sometimes you see spellings in the Torah that aren't consistent with what you would expect from the Hebrew, but it's not a mistake. It's how it's supposed to be, right? But then you read it differently. I feel like this is an example of that, right? Where it became like codified and canonized, a mistake or just something that maybe wasn't exactly like how, it wasn't applied like how maybe it should have been. Um, and it also kind of comes down to maybe keeping a fence around it a little bit. We have a saying within halakha about keeping a fence around the laws, right? So going a little bit extra beyond what's necessarily prescribed in the Torah, and just going a little step beyond that, just to protect it. So it kind of seems like it's something a little bit along those lines. Now, in terms of the actual meaning of kitniyot, um, I mean, nothing that I've come across has ever really adequately explained why we have this tradition. We just know that we can only speculate, like I said, that it could have been out of an abundance of caution in case any chametz would find its way into the foods. And, that, I mean, I was always told growing up that kitniyot, it was about the marketplaces and the way the things were set up and arranged in the marketplaces in Ashkenaz, was such that chametz would often be like next to those other things, and so you don't eat them either during Passover. But then in the Sephardic and Mizrahi worlds, that wasn't the case, and so they didn't have that obligation. So we don't really know. I've never heard anyone adequately explain any further meaning for directly related to Passover about kitniyot, but it's a good question. Yeah, Maggie.
I think that it's interesting to me that corn be on this list
Mm-hmm.
since it was never even there.
Right.
It's like, why?
I will say, I also came across something that speculated that potatoes might have even made their way onto this list, but potatoes weren't even native. They weren't even brought over to that area yet. By the 1300s, when this was first going on. So, but God forbid any of us should not be able to eat potatoes during Passover, right? We use potato starch in like everything, and so many of the best dishes have potatoes in them. So, like I said, some of it just does seem to be kind of arbitrary. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the tradition doesn't still hold a meaning to you. If that's the way you grew up keeping Passover and that holds meaning and value to you, then feel free to continue avoiding kitniyot during Passover. I think there's reasons. There's lots of reasons for both ways to do it. Yeah, Maggie.
I just wanted to mention that we have a friend who grew up in Morocco, and so and she usually comes to our Passover Seder, and so we often have considered the Sephardic path.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, in theory, if you had a group getting together for Passover and you just avoided kitniyot and it wouldn't come up, right? But if you wanted to go over to your Sephardic friend's house and be able to eat Passover, according to their customs, and then feeling like it's not the same and it's not equated, and that can be problematic. So I will say that the arguments made in Let My Popcorn Go, I found very compelling. Um, I no longer see the issue. I mean, so far, I have not really eaten keep me out during Passover, but I think that the argument is very compelling, and I would be open to doing that. I think because of that. Yeah, Flo?
When I was growing up, I heard corn was forbidden because it ferments.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's
so fermentation is not a problem with regards to Passover. We can eat pickles. There's no problem with actually, and in fact, a lot of prepared horseradish has gone through a fermentation process. So it's not fermentation that's the problem with regards to Passover. It's like I said, it's those 5 categories of chametz, and by the way, it's once they've been leavened. Right, there is nothing inherently chametz, and I'll get to that later with the next topic. But there's nothing inherently chametz about any of them unless they've sat in water. So for a significant enough period of time in order to start leavening. So yeah, was that a hand, Jan?
What does it mean to leaven oats?
So in order to leaven, I'm not an expert on that, but it's a scientific, it's a chemical process that they go through. So you can, if I were really knowledgeable, I could probably tell you the exact chemical compounds of what brings about the process of leavening. And I did forget to mention, by the way, that those 5 things that are chametz, and I will say, we don't eat yeast during Passover either, because that is directly a direct agent of leavening, which we all know. Now, I have read some things about baking soda and baking powder being considered somewhat problematic, but no one seems to have made an adequate judgment call as to whether that is fully in a state of chametz or not, because it does have a bit of a leavening. It is a bit of a leavening agent, but not exclusively. And it doesn't leaven things the same if they are not already chametz. So how does that work out? It's a little unclear. Is that a hand, Ruth?
Cantor, I just have one
Yeah.
about that. If you buy oats to make oatmeal,
Mm-hmm.
have those oats already been?
Okay. I know what you're getting to. So, interestingly, of the list of 5 items which are considered chametz, oats is actually a tricky one, because one of the things that I've read mentioned there's a little bit of uncertainty whether oats is the correct translation from the Tanakh, because keep in mind we have a document that tells us what is chametz and what's not okay to eat during Passover, but that document is thousands of years old, and how reliable is it for translating and for being able to tell just exactly what crop is this referring to, right? So we speculate that it's oats. I will say that of the ones listed, oats can behave somewhat differently, but it's the only one out of those 5 it's gluten-free, that can be gluten-free. I will say, if anyone's celiac, that it can be difficult to find truly gluten-free oats, because they are frequently cross-contaminated with wheat and with other glutinous items. So that's something to be aware of. But yeah,
Cantor,
yes.
on housetohouse.com, it says leaven is what is placed in bread dough to make the bread rise.
Mm-hmm.
And we normally think of yeast as a leavening agent.
Yep.
But there are many such ingredients, such as baking powder or baking soda.
Yep. Like I said, it kind of comes into that halfway category. I haven't seen anything that explicitly states baking powder or baking soda as being not okay for Passover. But I guess, I haven't really seen a whole lot of recipes that call for them during Passover either. So
No.
it's kind of an in-between status. Yeah, Ruth.
I think the substitute is eggs, because like I made a cake today and I beat the egg whites, and that makes leavening and it made the cake lighter, and eggs are fine. I did the yolk separately and then beat the egg whites and beat it into the batter, and that made it like a leavening. It raises
eggs do have a chemical process that they introduce into the things you're baking them with, but technically it's not the same as leavening. Yeah. I don't know if there's an exact word for what it is in the process, but it's not quite exactly the same as leavening. Now, the thing is, even though we often introduce yeast to a dough that we're making, even though we often do introduce yeast to that in order to get it to rise, it'll still do that. It'll still go through that process without it, but not to the same degree.
Uh-huh.
The eggs are actually a physical process rather than
Yes.
a chemical process.
Mm-hmm. It's so they can it's like the process that you described, Ruth, is when you're like whisking the eggs, and especially the egg whites, that introduces air, so that's aeration. That's kind of the process that goes into the eggs with that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Does anybody else have any questions regarding keeping out? If you think of anything, feel free to hold on to it and put it in the chat. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is matzah. Halach ma'anya, the bread of affliction. Okay, so matzah as we know it, this is important because not everybody necessarily realizes that, because we call this halach ma'anya, we call this the bread of affliction, and matzah as we know it in its flat square cracker form has only been the standard since around the 1880s, 1890s, with the growing need to make shelf-stable matzah available for mass consumption, right? So when the model for how people were acquiring their food, in some of the things that I've read about this, actually, they mentioned individual synagogues just taking care of it in your community, and baking and getting the matzah out for everybody in their community. But of course, there was such a growth rate, that it was a little bit tricky to keep up with the demand. And so, of course, people were going to grocery stores to buy their foods, right? So there came a need to have a shelf-stable matzah available. And if it's going to sit there on the shelves for a year, the old form of matzah is not going to do the trick. It's gonna not be good for eating anymore. So prior to that, and still today, particularly among Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, matzah looks more like this, right? It looks kind of like a naan or a flatbread or a pita, right? It's definitely not what many of us are used to eating at the Seder table. So I wanted to bring this up because I think it's interesting for us to learn just what this process is like. So how do we know what matzah looked like? And this, I want to give a shout out to my friend Aaron Asher, and he's an Egyptian Jew, and he actually does a project each year on soft matzah, and he goes to different communities teaching about the process of soft matzah and the history of it, and even how to make it, which I think has changed a little bit during quarantine, but he's a really, really great resource for this. So for the korech section of the Seder, we eat a matzah sandwich with the maror and charoseh, right? A lot of people call it the Hillel sandwich. But the word korech actually means something entirely different, according to Jastra, which is a very useful resource on Talmudic and biblical Hebrew. And every other major Talmudic Aramaic dictionary. Korech means to circle around, to wrap. So this means that during the time of Hillel and the compilation of the Haggadah, matzah could not have been as we have it now, because you can't wrap it, right? If you try to do that, your matzah will just break into a million pieces. I'm sure we all know that, right? So this actually shows you the entry from the Jastra that he mentioned, right? So all of these different connotations surrounding this word, they all have to do with around, right? So not a round shape, and just a roundness in order to be able to wrap it around, right? We definitely cannot do that with the modern matzah that many of us are so used to.
That makes so much more sense.
Yes. So, and here's another resource that he mentioned in terms of how do we know matzah looked like. So this is from Pesachim, which is a Talmudic source. So Rabba, the son of Rab Huna, said in Rab's name, if a loaf of bread is found and it went moldy, if there are more matzah loaves around it, then normal leavened loaves, is it permitted to be eaten during Pesach? And how is that meant? Shall we say that the owner knows that this bread is leavened when then matters it if there are more matzot, right? So it's actually trying to, a lot of the Talmud is arguing halacha and trying to resolve certain issues that may come up. A lot of what ifs Certainly not all the what ifs, because I'm sure they would have been baffled by the way society runs today, but they do cover a lot of what ifs, and this is one of them. So we know that in Pesachim that it was actually mentioned about matzah going moldy. The matzah we buy in boxes does not mold, right? I don't know if any of you have, kept your boxes from over the years. If you haven't opened the plastic part, it'll be good for years. There's nothing, it doesn't go bad. If the plastic part has been opened and it has previously been exposed to air, it can go stale, but it does not mold. So
That's cool.
you can actually make soft matzah at home. All it takes is flour and water and some salt. And then the question might arise, but isn't flour chametz? Nope, it is not chametz. Flour doesn't become chametz until it sits in water for too long. Now, in terms of what actually constitutes too long, we know that 18 minutes is the amount of time. Shmeera Matzah, goes through that process, and they say it has to be done. The whole process has to be completed within 18 minutes in order for it to be okay. The number is actually maybe a little bit different. There were some resources that mentioned the amount of time it takes to walk from such and such city to the next such and such city, which they estimated to be 72 minutes or something like that. But that also seems a little bit long, because it does seem. Now, granted, if a lot of us are used to making dough with yeast in it, and it can leaven a lot sooner than that. So maybe flour and water by itself doesn't leaven as quickly without the yeast in it. So, but certainly, this next point is important. As long as you are working the dough, it does not have an opportunity to leaven. That process comes when it sits still. So one of the resources that my friend Erin shared with me mentioned that you could literally work the dough all day long. It would not have any chance to rise. I mean, as to whether you'd want to, I imagine your muscles would get pretty sore if you did that. But if you continue to work the dough, you don't need to worry about it becoming chametz. Some authorities, this is important to note, some authorities might require you to buy flour that was specially supervised so that they can be assured the wheat never sat in water long enough when it was processed, right? Because this is a part that we don't get to witness. We have the flour that comes to us, right? But you don't know unless it was supervised. Maybe it could have sat in water for all you know. Now, I will point out that the modern flour making process does require moisturization in order to release from the kernel, but it doesn't usually sit in water in order to do so. Now, historically, that may have been the case, but the modern process usually doesn't do that. So, if you were being extra careful, if you were making matzah at home and you wanted to be sure, so technically, if you were being that level of careful, you might have to buy specially supervised flour, like the kind that they probably use in making our matzah in the first place, the cracker kind. But if you were a little bit less concerned about that, because you trust the fact that the modern process doesn't let it sit in water and it doesn't become chametz, then you could just use the regular flour you've bought in the grocery store. My friend Aaron, he mentioned that in order to have that special level, he actually buys the wheat berries fresh, and then he grinds them himself. So you can actually do that part too, and then you'll know that it wasn't ever sitting in water like that. It does require careful cleaning of all surfaces to ensure any flour dust does not become chametz, right? Because we make it a special goal to make sure we clear the household of chametz. You could unintentionally make chametz if you didn't really carefully clean up after yourself, if you were making matzah at home with flour. So that is something that you might want to be concerned about. But maybe if you just used a special surface and covered things and then threw things away, there's different ways around this kind of stuff. I'll come to questions in just a second here. All right, Flo, you're up.
Okay, what you just said about the chametz. This Friday is not Passover, but it's Shabbat.
Yes.
I know growing up, our house was usually pretty clean by Friday.
Yep.
By the day before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do about having the bread in the house and all that? The Orthodox prepare a Seder meal when Passover starts on Saturday.
Yes. So this is a really wonderful point that you bring up, Flo. So there's a couple things. Number one, what do you clean out of the house? So by these standards, you would not need to clear flour out of your house. Though some people do go so overboard that they do temporarily or permanently until it's time for Passover to end, get rid of their flour. Sometimes they even do that with kitniot too, although there is no such prohibition on kitniot. I mean, even if you're not eating it during Passover, you don't necessarily need to get rid of it in the household. Now, getting rid of your bread and your crackers and anything with leavening, that is part of the custom. So, having done this personally, the process of turning over your kitchen, if you have a job and if you're working, it usually takes a couple days to be able to take care of everything. And I specifically recall last year while my roommate and I were turning over the kitchen, we had like half of the stove prepared, and like we already started to make the stock, the vegetable stock for our matzo ball soup in advance. Just have that out and just parts of the counter, and then we gradually turned over the rest of it in the full kitchen. So it definitely between cleaning all your surfaces, your floors, and the rest of your house too, and vacuuming. And I will mention, by the way, if you're not aware of this, the concept of spring cleaning almost certainly originates from this custom of clearing the chametz out of the house. Because if you think about when the timing is, we just had the vernal equinox just this weekend, and it is now spring, and just on the heels of that, we have Passover. So they are connected. I'm sure there are many people who are already getting ready and starting to prepare their kitchens, maybe even now. But your timeline will just kind of depend on the amount of time you have to dedicate to doing that. Both the process of actually finding any chametz left and crumbs of anything in the house, and actually all the surfaces in the kitchen, and of course any appliances you're going to use, like the oven. Cleaning out the oven is a whole thing. So there's those components. And the other thing you brought up, Flo, is the timing of when Passover starts, because that is something to consider. It does make things a little bit more complicated, because for people who are observant, Passover coming on the heels of Shabbat means that they can't spend that whole day cooking because it's Shabbat. So a lot of, I'm sure, Orthodox and households and people who are of a more traditional vein, especially if they're Shomer Shabbos, will already be turning their kitchens over, early this week or middle of this week, in order to, have their cooking, a lot of their cooking done before Shabbat starts, and that way they can reheat their food. And I did talk to my parents about this, and my mom told me how difficult it was that Passover was starting on a Saturday night, because it's gonna make everybody's seders go really late. They go late already as it is. Even if you start early, it takes a long time to get through the whole thing, right? But it's already going to be starting late because you have to wait until Havdalah. Then you can start Passover Seder, and it's already 7:30, 8:30 when it's start time, and that's quite late. So I imagine a lot of people who are in that predicament will have their seders going until 1 a.m. or who knows when. But yeah, so those are all things that kind of that need to be taken into considerations. The process of turning over your kitchen, and I am sure there are many people who, out of an abundance of caution, wouldn't feel comfortable to continue making matzah from scratch in their home once the kitchen has been turned over, because they would be concerned about that flour dust and anything turning into chametz. So if they wanted to make their own matzah at home, perhaps they might do that by making it in advance and putting it in the freezer, or just kind of hanging on to it until it's time, and then they don't have to worry about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions about soft matzah? Oh, I'm seeing a couple hands raised. Renee.
Yeah. So in my extended family, through the years, there was this big deal about Shmeera Matzah.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that such a big deal? I never understood.
So, Shmeera Matzah is made in Israel. and it usually does tend to be actually round, but it still is every bit as thin. I don't know if anybody, I mean, feel free to disagree with me if it's your favorite, but I have tried Shmeera Matzah before and can't imagine anything more tasteless.
Yeah, it's. I agree.
And not only is it tasteless, but it costs so much more to
Yes.
get it. So you're paying more for a worse experience, a tasting
Yes.
experience, right? But in terms of the level of kashrut, people will argue that it's the highest level because every single stage at which between when the crop was grown and the matzah was delivered to you, every single stage was completely watched over. And in fact, that's the word shmora comes from the shor shin mem resh, shomer, to watch over, to guard, right? So so from the moment when it was in the fields and harvested, they watched, they made sure it didn't sit in water. Then when it was ground down, they made sure it didn't sit in water, right? And then when it was baked, someone was guarding, observing it, watching it, supervising the whole entire time, and you better bet it was, the whole process took less than 18 minutes or less, exactly the amount of time that they prescribed. So every single step of the way it was watched, and I guess that special level, if people feel more comfortable eating their matzah and knowing that there's absolutely no trace, no chance of chametz in their matzah, then that might be what they go with.
Okay.
Did you have another question, Flo?
No, I'm just thinking with when you consider how many people find all matzah tasteless,
Well, sure.
that that really has to be extra special.
I will say, I've always, since I was a kid, I've always been a fan of the egg matzahs. I don't know if anybody else likes egg matzahs, right? But they have egg added in, and sometimes they're sweetened a little bit with apple juice, or so that little bit of extra sweetness and strength by the egg that's kind of added in. That for me makes it a more tasteful experience.
It's not as hard either.
It's not as hard. It doesn't crumble as awfully. Yeah. So there's those elements. I will say that the regular matzahs are probably better for cooking with if you're gonna actually be cooking the matzah. But egg matzah is what I prefer to eat. Now, I will also say that I don't know if anyone out there has ever tried the gluten-free matzahs, but they are actually tastier than the regular. Because they are primarily made from potato flour, potato starch. So they kind of have the flavor and texture that is a bit reminiscent of a potato chip. So if that's something you enjoy, you might end up liking the gluten-free matzahs better. But I will say that that rabbis have weighed in on this, and the fact that gluten-free matzahs do not fulfill your halachic requirement during Passover to eat matzah, because they are not made from one of the 5 grains that's specified. So if someone is celiac and anything that had gluten in it, which most other matzahs do, and if that were going to upset the balance of their body, then they are just not obligated to that mitzvah. But certainly those of us who don't have problems with gluten should consider it an obligation to eat the matzah, and just eat whatever you prefer to eat outside of the Seder obligations. Anything else about soft matzahs? I'm not able to see I'm trying to see the chat, but I can't right now because of the screen share. So if there's anything in there that anyone that's worth mentioning for this question segment, otherwise I'm gonna move on. And there's just one small topic left, which is gebrochts. I want to just quickly see. And raise your hand if you're familiar with the concept of gebrochts during Passover. I just want to take a quick survey and see if people are familiar with this phrase, with this word, gebrochts. I see a couple hands. Okay, so what is gebrochts? I just wanted to mention it because it's a custom relating to what we eat on Passover. So it's the theory that cooking your matzah may cause it to become chametz, right?
Oh, great.
We see that they have a very specific amount of time that the matzah must be cooked when it's baking in order for it to not become leavened. So there is a school of thought that says gebrochts. They say gebrochts means broken. they say that if you're gonna cook your matzah, that you're restarting the clock on that, and that it could therefore become leaven. So this is a quick list of foods that this would apply to. Matzah ball soup, matzah brie, matzah lasagna, matzah farfel, matzah pizza, anything made from matzah meal, etc. So that's a lot of the foods that people have mentioned as their favorite must for Passover. And so there are some Jews who would say, I can't eat that during Passover, right? So on a chemical level, and this is something that even some rabbis have said. So once the matzah is baked the first time, it no longer has the opportunity to fully leaven, right? If you think about any of the cooking you've ever done with matzah meal or with matzah, it doesn't behave the same way as bread does, right? We can still use the crumbs, cracker crumbs, whatever, to bread things, so to speak. And we can make matzah muffins and popovers and rolls and all kinds of sorts of things like that. But they are not exactly the same as they would be if they had full opportunity to leaven in the first place. So this definitely is one of those cases that it's a practice that keeps a fence around the mitzvah. Okay, so what effect does gebrucht have? I want to mention this custom is primarily observed by Hasidic Jews, but I would not presume to say that all of them keep this custom. I'm sure there are plenty who don't. So where this comes into play is for Jews who observe a gebrucht level of kashrut during Passover. This means they would not share dishware or cookware with anything that had come into contact with matzah cooked more than its baking time, as it would qualify as chametz status to them. So for example, I have heard of some restaurants, if they're open during Passover in Israel, that put a sign out on their menus, or they make sure their customers are aware of this. If you would like to dunk, if you're planning to dunk your matzah in your soup, let us know so we can bring you out a disposable bowl, because they don't want their dishware to come into contact with matzah that had the opportunity to soak. So this is gebrucht's level. This is something to be aware of, because it does have an effect for some people in terms of their observance. So this also does affect some kosher Passover labels. So many of us who do use matzah meal, I'm sure a lot of us do, and matzah farfel and cook with matzah, it's a very common practice. Something to be aware of, because sometimes you might notice gebruchts on the label. So it'll say gebruchts if it is something that is classified in this way, that people who don't eat gebruchts during Passover, that they don't eat cooked matzah, might have a problem with being able to buy and consume that particular type of food during Passover. All right, so does anybody have any questions about gebruchts? Hopefully I've adequately explained that custom if you weren't aware of it before. Does anyone have a question? I can't see the chat, so I'm trying to, here, I'm just going to stop the share.
Okay.
That way I can see the chat.
It's nice to be warm.
All right, so. By the way, I will say that a lot of my non-Jewish friends love matzah. They don't have to eat it for a whole 8 days.
Right.
But they'll say that they love matzah. So
Yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and I know a lot of us do really look forward to the foods that we eat during Passover, and that's not to say that we can't also kvetch if we get a little, if we want to complain about what it does to our digestive systems, or just how we can get sick of eating the same kind of food over and over. But there is a lot of really great food to be had during Passover, and I just wanted to make sure we all had the opportunity to learn a bit about this. Yes.
One of the nice things about Passover that I've always loved is it's, in some ways, if you can avoid the matzah with butter, is the way I like it, many times a day, it can be a very healthy diet, because you're eating vegetables and you're eating protein, and it not a lot of extra starchy stuff.
Well, it depends, because if you do eat matzah, lots of matzah, then that is,
well, no,
some of the starchy things.
Yeah, like
I know a lot of people who a lot of people who are vegan and vegetarian really struggle during Passover if they are expected to avoid kitniyot, right? Because it's a very, very big category of foods that people will eat on an average basis, and a lot of those foods are really healthy. So that is one thing to be aware of. Well, feel free to continue ruminating on what we just covered, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of get the conclusion going with another song. So, of course, I mentioned a really helpful article when I was talking about Kitniyot, and that was "Let My Popcorn Go." So I couldn't waste the opportunity to sing "Let My People Go, Go Down Moses." So feel free, if you're on mute, you'll be able to still sing along with me. So feel free to do that. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell on Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Oh, let us all from bondage flee. Let my people go. And soon may all the earth be free. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you.
You want to give us a preview of what's in store for Sunday's second Seder?
Well, that would be telling.
Later.
Tease us.
You wanted
Oh, I'm sure just many of the same melodies that you're used to singing every year, right? There's something beautiful about the practice of coming back to the same holidays year after year and having our traditions, having our customs built in, and things that we love to hear every time. And Passover is one of those for sure, both with the foods and with the music. That's definitely what I believe. Now, and there's always opportunities for new traditions too, like with foods, new things you're going to try out. Who knows what's going to be the next tradition? And same thing goes with songs too.
Great. Have you seen the song, The Four Sons to the Song of Clementine?
I have. Actually, growing up, we would always spend one of our Seder nights with our close family friends who lived in the same neighborhood as us. And so we had a whole group, mostly my sister Joanna, like a lot of her friends were also living in the same neighborhood as us. So the parents and the kids, and we would all get together for in the neighborhood at one of their houses for Seder, and we always went to another of their houses for breakfast after Yom Kippur. So we had these traditions of places we go, and one of the really fun things about their Seder every year is that they had a whole packet of contrafacted songs that a lot of them set to Disney and a lot of them set to all different kinds of folk and popular tunes that incorporated Passover lyrics. I remember one of them is just a spoon of charoset makes the bitter herbs go down, bitter herbs go down, right? So there's said the father to his children on the Seder you must dine. Yeah, that was one of them too, the Clementine one. Yeah, so there's a bunch of those songs.
If you
one
wanted
time I actually kept the packet, but I don't know what I did with it. So I'd probably have to ask them again to maybe if they could scan it and send it to me because I love those.
I found the words to the Clementine one in the recipe book.
Very nice. Okay, I got the recipe book from the pickup, so yeah, I'll have to.
Well, I don't know that you put the song in it. Did you, Kathleen? I'll send you the words to the song separately.
Yeah, I definitely remember that one. Said the father to his children at the Seder, you must dine, you must something, you must drink
Shmeera
cups of wine.
Matzah.
Yeah, you must eat your fill of matzah. You must eat. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, those are always a lot of fun.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So everybody will see you next Sunday night. It
Yes.
starts at 5 o'clock.
Yes.
Yes.
Starts at 5 o'clock because we want to get the service in so people can eat in a manner, and we don't want the kids falling asleep. And I'm in charge of assigning readings, so if you want a reading, let me know. That way I don't have to go looking for you.
Yeah, we need our ringers for all the rabbis' names.
I'll read, Flo.
Okay, good.
I'll read. Flo.
Okay,
I'll send you an email.
send me an email.
Okay, good.